This was by far the coolest thing that I've ever done, but in recent years I haven't really spoken about it on YouTube, so I wanted to make a video explaining exactly how and why and answering all the FAQs that I've had about my trip from Bali to London without flying. So in 2019, I, as a solo female traveller, travelled all the way from Bali in Indonesia to London, England, without taking a single flight. So I got coaches, I got ferries, I got small little boats, I got trains. I covered 14,000 miles solely by land, and then I took little boats and ferries where I had sea or lakes to get across. And yeah, made it back to London, England. I did this trip because I've always been really fascinated in overland travel. I've always been fascinated in seeing cultures and landscapes change before your eyes, rather than just flying somewhere and everything being different immediately. I've always really loved the experience of changing, and I guess the experience of travelling in itself, like sitting on a train, getting cozy, seeing the landscapes change. That is my idea of a good time. I've basically always really enjoyed the aspect of travelling overland. I road tripped around the whole of Australia previously, and I'd also done a few driving or coach and train trips through Europe. But I wanted to set my sights on a bigger overland trip, which is why I decided to try to get from the furthest logical point back to England. And I say furthest logical point because you can get on cargo ships and go to places like Australia or New Zealand. You can also get on other boats and go further east in Indonesia. However, I didn't have that much money. I only had 5 months to do the whole trip, and I wanted to stop in quite a lot of places along the way. It was getting a bit complicated once I went past Bali. So I decided to start in Bali, where I could easily fly to from the UK, and basically make it a Bali to London without flying trip. Let's break down the countries that I went through, and I'll give a rough indication, I think I can remember it all, of the transport that I used. This was in 2019, so some of the borders are still closed because of various things that have happened over the last few years. So obviously Bali was my starting place. I started in Uluwatu because it was, you know, right at the bottom of Bali. I did have a poetic notion of sort of seeing the sunrise and setting off on my journey, but then I realised I was actually on the side of the peninsula where the sunset was better. But I went to Uluwatu Temple, I saw the kekak dance they have there, and then I set off on my way. From Uluwatu, I had to get a motorbike to Denpasar, and then from Denpasar I got a bus to Gili Manuk, which is where you can take a ferry to Java. Got a ferry to Java, ended up in Banyuwangi. The very same night I went up Mount Ijen, which is a volcano with sulphur, blue sulphur, really beautiful. Then I went across Java, I went to Mount Bromo, which was also stunning. I went to Yogyakarta, and I ended up in Jakarta. In Jakarta, I went on what was probably my most uncomfortable journey, and that was a 59-hour bus that left Jakarta and went up to Pekanbaru, which is halfway up Sumatra. From Pekanbaru, I had to get a range of transports to get to Singapore. I think it took me a day. I didn't have to break the journey at all, but I think I took a bus and 3 boats to get to Singapore via Batam Island. Got to Singapore, and then I was on the kind of Eurasian mainland. So it did actually get a bit easier then. Indonesia was probably the most challenging part of my journey, just logistics wise. From Singapore, I got a bus up to Malacca to Kuala Lumpur to Kuala Lumpur and then Langkawi. And then I took a boat from Langkawi to the coast of Thailand. Went up to Krabi to Bangkok by night bus, and then another night bus to Cambodia. Then in Cambodia I went to the lovely island of Koh Rong. I went to Kampot, which is like in the Cambodian countryside, and I went to Phnom Penh. And then from Phnom Penh I went into Vietnam. I went to the Mekong Delta, which I absolutely love. That's probably my favourite place in Vietnam. Absolutely lush. Then I went I didn't go to Ho Chi Minh City actually, no, I went to Dalat, which is in the Highlands, managed to get a direct bus there instead of having to go around to Ho Chi Minh City. I went to Nha Trang, then I went to Hoi An. I did the Hai Van Pass on a motorbike. I did not drive. I had a local guide who did the driving. And then went to Hue, which is one of the old capitals of Vietnam, I believe. Then went up to Phong Nha, saw some beautiful caves, and then Hanoi, and from Hanoi I got a night train into China. So there is a nightly train that connects Hanoi with Nanning, which is one of the cities in southern China. So from Nanning I went to Guangzhou. And from Guangzhou, I went to Zhangjiajie, which is where the Avatar movies were filmed. It's the Avatar Mountain National Park. Really stunning place, honestly incredible. One of my favourite places I've been to in China. I've been to China 4 times, I think, because I've got a family there. So I was sort of seeing a few places that I hadn't previously been to. And another place that I hadn't been to was Hangzhou. So I went there, then went to Shanghai and Beijing, which I had previously been to, but was nice to see them again. And then I was going to board the Trans-Mancunian. That sounds like Manchester. What's that called? The Trans-Siberian, but part of China. Trans-Siberian China. Trans-Mancunian? I honestly can't remember the name, but there's the Trans-Siberian and then there's the Trans-Mongolian and then there's another line that goes down into Beijing. I don't think it's the Trans-Mancunian. That doesn't sound right. That sounds like something that's going to go through Manchester. If you know it, let me know in the comments. Anyway, I was going to get on that train, but it was actually very expensive to get the cross-border train. But what I did instead is I got a sleeper bus from Beijing to the Mongolian border, crossed the border by a jeep. You get like loads of jeep drivers around the border. That's how you get across. And then I got the train, picked the train up from there, and it was a lot cheaper. I think it was something ridiculous, like £6 for an overnight sleeper from the border of Mongolia and China to Ulaanbaatar, which is the capital. Got to Ulaanbaatar, and actually I wanted to do a bit more in Mongolia. I wanted to go around the Gobi Desert, etc. But I had to get a Russian transit visa and I had to stay in Ulaanbaatar to get it, basically. So I ended up spending about 10 days in Ulaanbaatar, which is a long time to spend in Ulaanbaatar. Definitely saw all of the attractions there. But then I got the Russian transit visa and I boarded the Trans-Mongolian train, which took me all the way to Novosibirsk in Russia, obviously. And then because of the visa I was on, I was only allowed to spend one night in Russia, not on a train. So I spent one night in Novosibirsk and then I got on another train that took me down to Kazakhstan. So I went to Astana in Kazakhstan, got the train down to Almaty. I loved Almaty, it's such a cool city. Then I got the train down to Tashkent in Uzbekistan and travelled through Uzbekistan. And then I ended up back in Kazakhstan in town. There must be a city called Aktau. Hilariously, when me and my partner met, which is another story for another day, we had this massive chat about Aktau because we realised we'd both been and not that many people have been to Aktau. So that was how we bonded. So I was in Aktau, and basically from Aktau you have to get across the Caspian Sea. So what I did is I basically got on board a cargo ship that goes across the Caspian Sea. A lot of travellers do it. It's fairly easy to do. You do need a contact who can tell you when the ship is leaving, but I found a contact basically, and then you go onto this ship. You get a room and everything. I actually got my own room, but it is generally for cargo and for the drivers of lorries, but travellers are welcome as well as long as there's space, and there was tons of space on the crossing I was on. So that took me to Azerbaijan. I was actually quite unwell in Azerbaijan. Been there for 2 days and didn't see that much. But then I boarded a train to Georgia. Tbilisi was actually where I met my partner. We were on a walking tour. We already kind of knew each other because we worked in the same field. But yeah, we met, we drank lots of Georgian wine, and the rest is history. But he didn't carry on the trip with me, so I met him then, and then we saw each other again a few months later. So I did carry on the trip as a solo female traveller. So was in Tbilisi, ended up for about a week because I was with my partner for a bit. And then I crossed the border into Turkey, got the Eastern Express, which I actually done since then. First time I did it, like on this trip, I managed to get a sleeper and it was quite nice. The last time I did it, we could only get a seat, which was a little bit of a different experience, but anyway. So I took the Eastern Express to Ankara, the capital city of Turkey, then got a bus to Istanbul, and then basically just got a mix of trains and buses across Europe. Got a few trains through Eastern Europe, but then I was running a little bit low on funds by the time I was in Western Europe, so I mainly switched over to Flixbus, ultimately ended up in Calais, and then got a ferry to Dover, which is actually very near where I grew up, and then got a train into London. So that was my trip. It took me 5 months in total. It could have definitely taken me like less or more. I stopped off in quite a few places. I could have definitely stopped off in a lot more places, but basically I had a chunk of 5 months to spare. My sister was graduating and I wanted to be at her graduation, so I just did it then. So I had a date set that I was aiming to come back. Some places I went through quite quickly. Some of the places in like China and Central Asia, like you do cover a lot of miles quite quickly because like they're big countries, the rail systems are quite good, and like in Central Asia there's a lot of steppe, so you won't necessarily stop there. Obviously in Europe I did shorter journeys and stopped a bit more, but I only had about a month once I actually got to Europe because I'd spent a bit of time sort of previously in other places. So yeah, it was 5 months. When I posted on TikTok about this journey, a lot of people were asking about costs and visas. So costs, I spent about £8,000, I'm going to say. So at the time I was earning through my blog, which I still do, but that was my sole income at the time. And I was earning about £1,500 a month. And I didn't have that much money that I went out with. I kind of went out on a hope and a prayer, and it all worked out luckily. So I was getting about £1,500 in per month, and I pretty much spent that. So I was doing a bit of a mix. I was staying in some hostels. I was obviously doing budget transport at some points, but then like for example my Mongolian train, that cost me about £250. That was definitely the most expensive transport, but it also took me the furthest. Sometimes I'd stay in nicer hotels. I did a bit of a mix. Again, was eating a mix of street food and restaurants, but nowhere fancy or anything like that. I didn't really drink, so it was very much sort of food, mixed accommodation, transport. Transport's probably what I spent the most on, unsurprisingly. You could do it on less, definitely, if you exclusively stayed in hostels and exclusively did the absolute budget transport, but I don't think you could do it on substantially less. And you could obviously spend more. You know, you could stay in much nicer places than I stayed. You could do much cooler experiences, but that's just how I did it. And then a lot of people have asked about visas as well. This is a difficult question to answer because I do obviously recognise that as a British passport holder, I do have a lot of passport privilege. So I'm just going to have to say what I did personally. I know it's obviously very unfair that the situations are different for other nationalities, but what I had to do was, so everywhere in Southeast Asia was either visa on arrival or visa exemption, so it was just filling out a form when I got there. I think Cambodia, you get a sticker in your passport. Vietnam, I did have to apply for an e-visa in advance because at the time when you crossed over by land, you needed to have the visa in advance. But at the airports, you could get a visa on arrival, but obviously that didn't really work out for me. So that was everywhere in Southeast Asia. China, I had to get a visa in advance. I'd already had a Chinese visa. Like I said, I've got family there. My stepmom is Chinese and her family live there. So I've already been there a few times, and I just had to go to the embassy in London and get a 2-year multiple entry visa for China. Mongolia, I also had to go to the embassy in London, and that was just for a single entry visa. And it was just the same sort of thing. I went to the embassy, filled out some forms, sent my passport away and got that back. And Russia was the outlier. Like I said, I got a transit visa for Russia. I'm not sure what the rules are for this now because obviously with the current geopolitical situations, things may have changed a bit. But then at least you could only get a tourist visa if you had specific dates, if you had an itinerary and a few other things. This was for British passport holders. I obviously didn't have dates, I didn't have an itinerary, but what I could get was a transit visa in the country before Russia that I was transiting through. So I basically got a transit visa to use Russia as transit from Mongolia to Kazakhstan. And that's what it said on my visa. I was allowed to spend 5 days in Russia, but only one night outside of a train. So hence my one night in Novosibirsk. Kazakhstan was no visa now, and Uzbekistan was no visa. Yeah, they changed not long before I went there. Azerbaijan was e-visa. So I had to apply for it online. I think it took a couple of days to get back to me, but they got back to me. Georgia is no visa. Turkey was visa at the time, but that has since been abolished. So now it's no visa for British passport holders. And then after that I was in the EU, and I think we were still in the EU then. So that was what I did visa-wise. Obviously I know that's not going to be the same for everyone, but that's what I did. Another question that I had about this trip was safety. Like, did I feel safe as a solo female traveller? Honestly, I did. I didn't feel unsafe anywhere. Probably the place I felt most unsafe in was Paris. No, I didn't feel unsafe at all in any of the countries that I've been to. In fact, I would also say that China to Turkey, that sort of segment of my trip, that definitely felt the safest. Those countries, the crime levels are very low. You don't get any kind of catcalling or any of that type of hassle at all. A lot of places in Central Asia, I was quite often asked where my husband was. More to do with curiosity than anything else, and I'd sort of gauge the situation. If it was, I don't know, if I thought they were asking genuinely out of curiosity, then I'd tell them the truth. If they were, you know, if I thought that they were maybe asking because of, you know, because they were more than curious, I guess, then I'd maybe fabricate something, which is a bit rubbish that women have to do that, but obviously it's important to stay safe. But yeah, I mean, generally I didn't feel like any of the situations were actually dangerous at all. Europe is largely safe, but you do get a bit more catcalling there, I've always found. Southeast Asia as well, I mean, I think it is pretty safe. So many solo female travellers go to Southeast Asia, but I do think in Southeast Asian tourist areas there is a bit more maybe scams and stuff going on. Outside of the tourist areas there isn't this problem, but in some places that have gotten really over touristy, there are a few things to watch out for, I find. But yeah, generally very, very safe. I am an experienced traveller. I was an experienced traveller when I did this, and I am quite good at all the logistics and making sure I've got my bearings and, you know, not looking too lost. But I, yeah, can hand on heart say I never felt in danger at all. Another question that I got asked so much was, why did you do it and not fly? I shared this TikTok. So many people were like, by the way, flying's quicker, or like, here's a tip. Next time you can just fly, it'll take you a day. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not the point. Like, the point was travelling, seeing loads of stuff on the way, and just enjoying overland travel. So in all honesty, 2018, I had the worst year of my life. I went through a bereavement. I had a load of other awful situations were in my life. And when 2018 finished and 2019 rolled around, I was like, I need to get out of this rut. I need to do what I've been telling myself I'm going to do for years. So I was like, right, this is an adventure that I've always wanted to go on. I know it's something I really want to do. If I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. So I did it, basically. That's the long and short of it. I love travel. I love solo travel. Even now I'm in a serious relationship, I still solo travel. And I just wanted to do it, basically. And I'm so glad I did. I honestly had the time of my life. I learned so much about myself. I really came into my own. Like, now I've done that, I really feel like I can do anything. It was mainly about me finding myself, me learning about myself, recovering from the awful stuff that happened in 2018. But I did also meet my lovely partner, who we've been together nearly 5 years now, and we are very, very, very happy, and I'm sure we will be together forever. So it ended up being kind of, you know, how I met the person. But I do also want to stress, like, it was mainly about me finding myself and me learning to love myself again. And obviously just me meeting my partner was just kind of the cherry on top of all of that. That is all I'm going to say about it for now. But if you've got any more questions, just drop me a comment. If I get enough, I'll maybe do another like Q&A, or I'll answer, you know, questions in the comments. I'm more than happy to help. People were very interested in this when I posted it on TikTok. So hopefully people will be interested on it here as well. I've not got anything of a similar length plan. I don't know, maybe I will again one day, but at the moment it's a long trip, but it's a very taxing, all-encompassing trip, and got quite a lot of other things going on at the moment. But I have got a few like mini similar trips coming up. We're talking like overland challenges, ferry trips, train trips, all of those kind of things, which I would really love you to stick around for. So if you are watching and aren't subscribed, please do. It is completely free and it really helps my channel out. And if you've liked this video, please give it a like. And yeah, please do comment below if you've ever thought about doing something like this. Any questions, any reservations. Like, I understand it's not for everyone, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about it. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope I will see you next time. Bye!